They say the Harrow plantation kept its darkest secrets behind locked doors, but everyone remembers the night Jasper Harrow made a choice no sane man would make. He looked at Elias, the tallest, strongest man on his land, a man who carried pain in silence, and forced him into something unspeakable with his own daughters, Annabel and Clara. Folks whispered that Elias's kindness kept the girls alive, and Jasper's cruelty shaped the children who came after. Those children, Samuel and Junia, grew up under their grandfather's iron hand, taught to obey, taught to fear, but never taught to forget. Because as the years passed, they started to see the truth in the scars on Elias's back, the tremble in their mother's voices, and the lies Jasper used to chain everyone to him. And when Samuel and Junia finally learned who they really were, they didn't run. They rose. Now the question is simple, but terrifying. What happens when the very blood Jasper tried to control decides to destroy the world he built? Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The fog came at dawn like it always did. It rolled across the cotton fields in thick gray waves, clinging to the stalks and pooling in the furrows where the earth had been turned. The enslaved workers moved through it like ghosts, their forms barely visible as they filed out from the quarters toward the day's labor. Their footsteps made soft sounds in the damp soil. No one spoke. Speech before sunrise earned punishment. Jasper Harrow stood on the veranda of his manor house, watching them with cold calculation. He held a leather-bound ledger against his chest, its pages marked with figures that made his jaw tighten. The numbers told a story he refused to accept. 3 consecutive seasons of declining yields, debts accumulating like rainwater in a broken barrel, creditors in New Orleans beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. He snapped the ledger shut. The morning light broke through the fog in pale yellow streaks. Jasper's fingers drummed against the book's spine as he watched his property, human and otherwise, begin another day of work that would not be enough, would never be enough at this rate. A house servant approached from behind, her eyes fixed on the floorboards. "The gentlemen have arrived, Master Harrow." Jasper turned without acknowledging her and walked inside. The study smelled of tobacco and old wood. 2 men sat in high-backed chairs near the fireplace, their faces ruddy from the morning brandy Jasper had poured. Dr. Pemberton, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, held his glass with both hands. Richard Caldwell, who owned the plantation to the east, sprawled in his chair with the comfort of someone who had slept well the night before. "Your letter mentioned urgent matters," Caldwell said, swirling his drink. Jasper paced before the mantel. "I need counsel. The harvest projections are down again. Labor efficiency has plateaued. I've beaten laziness out of them, threatened the runaways, sold off the troublemakers. Nothing changes." Pemberton adjusted his spectacles. "Perhaps the soil needs rotation." "It's not the damn soil." Jasper's voice cracked like a whip. "It's the stock. They're weak, bred for compliance, not strength. My father and grandfather prioritized obedience over capability, and now I'm paying for their short-sightedness." Caldwell raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you proposing?" Jasper stopped pacing. His eyes held a gleam that made Pemberton shift uncomfortably. "Selective breeding, controlled pairings based on physical traits and temperament. If we treat this like livestock management, scientific, deliberate, we could cultivate a stronger line within a generation." The room fell quiet except for the crackling fire. "That's not exactly uncommon practice," Caldwell said slowly. "Many plantations encourage breeding among their strongest workers. Encouraging isn't enough." Jasper moved to his desk and opened the ledger again, stabbing his finger at a column of numbers. "I need guaranteed results. Direct intervention. I have candidates in mind already." Dr. Pemberton set down his glass. "Jasper, I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm not asking for permission, Jasper closed the ledger with finality. "I'm informing you of my intentions so you can provide medical oversight when necessary." Caldwell studied his friend's face. Something had shifted in Jasper over the past months, a desperation that made him reckless. "Who are these candidates?" Jasper smiled thinly. "There's a man in the quarters. Elias. Strongest worker I've ever owned. 6.5 feet tall, never sick, sharp mind even if he hides it. He'll father the new line." "And the women?" Pemberton asked carefully. The smile faded from Jasper's face. "That's already decided." Neither man asked him to elaborate. The weight in his voice told them everything they needed to know. The inspection happened at midday. Jasper walked through the fields with his overseer, a thick-shouldered man named Garrett, who carried a coiled whip at his belt. The workers kept their heads down as their master passed, but Jasper paid them little attention. He was looking for one man. Elias worked at the far end of the westernmost field, his movements efficient and methodical as he cleared a clogged irrigation ditch. Sweat darkened his shirt despite the cool morning. He was exactly as Jasper remembered, towering, powerfully built, with the kind of quiet dignity that had always unsettled him. "Elias," Jasper called. The man straightened slowly. His face showed nothing. "Come with me." "Now." Elias set down his shovel without a word and followed Jasper and Garrett back toward the main house. Other workers watched from the corners of their eyes. Everyone knew what it meant when the master called you out of the fields in the middle of the day. Nothing good ever followed. They walked in silence through the kitchen garden, past the smokehouse, and into the manor through the back entrance. Servants scattered like startled birds. Jasper led Elias to his private office and dismissed Garrett with a curt nod. The door closed. Jasper circled behind his desk and sat, letting the silence stretch. Elias stood perfectly still, his eyes fixed on a point on the wall above Jasper's head. It was a slave's practiced neutrality. Show nothing, reveal nothing, survive. "Do you know why you're here?" Jasper asked. "No, sir. I have a task for you. An important one that will secure the future of this plantation." Jasper leaned forward, folding his hands on the desk. "You're going to father children with my daughters, Annabelle and Clara. You'll do this as many times as necessary until both women bear healthy offspring." Elias's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "No, sir," he said quietly. Jasper stood so quickly, his chair scraped against the floor. "What did you say?" "I won't do it, sir. You can beat me or sell me, but I won't do what you're asking." The plantation owner walked around the desk until he stood inches from Elias. Even then, he had to look up to meet the taller man's eyes. "Your mother," Jasper said softly. "Sarah. She's what, 60 years old now? Weak lungs. Works in the kitchen gardens because she can't manage field labor anymore." Elias's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I could have her moved to the fields. Hard labor from dawn to dusk. Or perhaps I'll sell her south. There are sugar plantations in Louisiana that work their people to death within 5 years. Jasper's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "Your compliance buys her comfort. Your refusal buys her suffering. It's a simple calculation." The silence that followed felt like falling. "When?" Elias finally asked, his voice hollow. "Tonight, 9 o'clock. You'll be brought to the house." Jasper returned to his chair, already dismissing him. "You may go." Elias turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Annabelle Harrow sat in the morning room with her sister, pretending to embroider. Her hands shook too badly to make proper stitches. The needle kept slipping through the fabric at wrong angles, creating crooked lines that looked like the work of a child. Clara stared out the window, her face pale. "He can't truly mean it," Annabelle whispered. "You know Father better than that." Clara's voice was flat. When has he ever said something he didn't mean? They had known this moment was coming since breakfast. when Jasper had called them into his study and explained his plan with the clinical detachment of a man discussing crop rotation. Annabel had tried to argue, had attempted to appeal to some hidden reserve of paternal feeling. Jasper had simply stared at her until she fell silent. "We could run," Clara said suddenly. "Where?" "We have no money, no friends beyond this property. Father has made sure of that." Annabel set down her embroidery hoop. "We've been prisoners our entire lives. We just didn't know it until now." Footsteps sounded in the hallway. Both sisters tensed. But it was only a house servant, passing by on some errand. The hours crawled forward. Lunch came and went, uneaten. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, turning the dust motes into tiny dancers. Annabel thought about the man she had seen once or twice from a distance, tall, quiet, moving through the fields with a kind of measured grace. She didn't even know what his voice sounded like. As twilight fell, a maid arrived to escort them to the parlor. "Master's orders," she said, not meeting their eyes. The parlor had been prepared. Candles burned on the mantelpiece and side tables, casting warm light that should have been comforting but instead felt theatrical. A decanter of wine sat on a silver tray. Fresh flowers filled a vase, as if this were a social occasion instead of what it truly was. Annabel and Clara sat together on the settee, their hands clasped tight. They waited. Outside, the sun finished setting. The house settled into its evening sounds, floorboards creaking, servants moving through distant rooms, the faint murmur of voices from the kitchen. Then footsteps approached down the back hallway. Heavy boots, multiple people. The sisters looked at each other, fear written plainly on both their faces. The footsteps grew louder, closer. The door opened. Elias stepped into the parlor, his shoulders filling the doorframe. Two overseers flanked him, Garrett on the left, a younger man named Morris on the right. Both carried pistols at their hips, though Elias showed no sign of resistance. His face was carefully blank, his hands loose at his sides. Jasper stood near the fireplace, watching his daughters with an expression that might have been satisfaction or contempt. It was difficult to tell. "Leave us," Jasper said to the overseers. Garrett hesitated. "Sir, are you certain?" "I said leave." Jasper's voice carried the edge of a man unused to repeating himself. "Wait in the hall. I'll call if I need you." The overseers withdrew. Jasper crossed to the door and turned the key in the lock with a decisive click that echoed through the room. He pocketed the key and turned to face the three people he'd imprisoned together. "You all understand what's expected," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'll return in 2 hours. The wine is there if you need it." He walked to a second door, one that led to his study, and passed through it. Another lock clicked into place. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Annabel couldn't look at the man standing across the room, her eyes fixed on the Persian rug beneath her feet, tracing the intricate patterns as if they held some answer to this nightmare. Beside her, Clara had gone perfectly still, barely breathing. Elias remained near the door, making no move to approach them. Minutes passed. The candles flickered. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour. "I won't hurt you." Elias's voice was low, carefully controlled. "I need you to know that." Annabel's head lifted. She met his eyes for the first time and saw something she hadn't expected, fear that mirrored her own. This towering man who looked like he could break a person in half was terrified. "We know this isn't your choice," she said quietly. "None of us chose this." Clara's hand tightened around her sister's. "Our father is a monster." Elias moved slowly to a chair against the far wall and sat, keeping distance between himself and the women. His hands rested on his knees, palms up in a gesture of harmlessness. "I have a mother in the quarters," he said. "Sarah. She's old now, sick. Your father threatened her. That's why I'm here." "He threatens everyone," Annabel replied. "It's how he controls the world." They talked in whispers, careful words exchanged like fragile gifts. Elias told them about his mother's garden, the small plot where she grew vegetables despite her failing health. Annabel spoke of childhood memories before their mother died, when the house had felt less like a prison. Clara said almost nothing, but she listened, and gradually the rigid terror in her posture eased into something closer to exhaustion. When Jasper returned 2 hours later, he found them sitting in careful silence, not touching, but no longer strangers. The second week brought rain. Elias arrived at the house dripping wet, his shirt clinging to his shoulders. Annabel had hidden food in the parlor, bread wrapped in cloth, cheese, dried fruit. She pressed it into his hands while Clara kept watch at the door. "You'll need your strength," Annabel said. "This is dangerous for you," Elias replied. "Everything is dangerous now." Clara turned from the door, her expression troubled. "Father locks us in this house like we're criminals. We never go to town, never see other people. He's kept us separate from the world our entire lives." "He's afraid," Elias said. "Afraid of what you might learn. Afraid of who you might become if you saw past these walls." Annabel's laugh was bitter. "We're prisoners just like you. We just have prettier chains." By the fourth week, they had developed a routine. Elias would arrive, and Annabel would tend to whatever new injury Jasper's overseers had inflicted that day. A split lip, bruised ribs, rope burns on his wrists. Clara brought water and clean cloth. They worked in silence, their movements gentle and deliberate. "You didn't deserve this," Clara whispered once, dabbing blood from a cut above his eye. "None of us did," Elias replied. The hours they spent together became a strange sanctuary from the horror surrounding them. They talked about everything and nothing. Annabel's love of books, Clara's skill with plants, Elias's childhood before he'd been brought to the Harrow plantation. They built something fragile and necessary in that locked parlor, a human connection that defied everything Jasper intended. The 8th week brought news. Annabel missed her monthly bleeding. She told Clara first, whispering the words in their shared bedroom late at night. Clara held her while she cried, not from shame, but from the overwhelming terror of what this meant. They told Elias the following evening. He closed his eyes, his jaw working. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Annabel said fiercely. "This child isn't a sin. The sin belongs to the man who forced this." 3 weeks later, Clara discovered she was pregnant too. Jasper's delight was obscene. He paced the parlor, talking about bloodlines and genetics and the future he was building. He increased the guards around the house, had the doctor visit weekly to check on his daughter's health. He treated the unborn children like prize livestock, valuable only for what they could produce. But he didn't see what was growing alongside the pregnancies, a fierce, protective alliance between the 3 people he'd tried to use as instruments. Annabel and Clara stopped fearing Elias. They began to see him as the only safe person in their world, the only one who treated them with genuine kindness instead of ownership. And Elias, who had tried so hard to preserve some piece of his humanity through this nightmare, found himself caring for these 2 women who'd been trapped just as thoroughly as he had. 5 months into the pregnancies, Annabel felt her baby move for the first time. She was sitting by the window when it happened, a flutter like butterfly wings against the inside of her belly. She gasped and pressed her hand to the spot, feeling it again. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Clara rushed to her side. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Annabel laughed through her tears. "The baby moved. I felt it." In the fields, Elias paused in his work. He didn't know why, couldn't have explained the sudden tightness in his chest. He straightened slowly, lifting his face to catch the breeze that swept across the cotton rows. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the main house, his children were growing. Children who would be born into this broken system, claimed by a man who saw them only as property. Elias closed his eyes. "I'll protect you," he whispered to the wind, to the distant house, to the babies who didn't yet know they existed. Whatever it takes. I swear it. The breeze carried his words away across the fields, a promise spoken into the gathering dark. 6 months passed under constant watch, with Jasper monitoring Annabel and Clara's pregnancies daily. The heat of July pressed down on the plantation like a wool blanket soaked in water. Inside the main house, the air hung thick and still despite the open windows. Hester, the midwife who had delivered babies on Harrowland for 30 years, climbed the stairs for the 4th time that morning, her weathered hands carrying fresh linens. Annabel's labor had started before dawn. The young woman gripped the bedpost, her nightgown drenched with sweat. Clara sat beside her, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead and whispering encouragement. Jasper had stationed himself in the hallway outside, pacing back and forth like a general awaiting news from the battlefield. "Breathe through it," Hester instructed, her voice calm despite the urgency of the moment. "The baby's coming soon," Annabel gasped as another contraction tore through her. She'd read about childbirth in her mother's old medical texts, but nothing had prepared her for this reality. The pain that consumed her entire body, the terrifying sense of being split open from the inside. "I can't," she whimpered. "You can," Clara said fiercely, gripping her sister's hand. "You're the strongest person I know." Hester positioned herself at the foot of the bed, checking Annabel's progress with practiced efficiency. "One more big push, child. Your baby's almost here." Annabel bore down with everything she had, her cry echoing through the room. Clara held her, and Hester's hands moved with sure competence, guiding the infant into the world. A baby's wail pierced the humid air. "A boy," Hester announced, wrapping the squirming infant in clean cloth. She worked quickly, clearing his airways and checking his tiny body for any signs of distress. Strong lungs, good color. Annabel collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Hester placed the baby in her arms, and Annabel stared down at the small, perfect face, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving, skin a beautiful shade of brown that left no question about his parentage. "Samuel," Annabel whispered. "His name is Samuel." The door burst open. Jasper strode in, his eyes immediately going to the infant. He approached the bed and looked down at the baby with an expression of cold appraisal, as if examining livestock at market. "Well built," he said. "Good bone structure. He'll grow strong." Annabel pulled Samuel closer to her chest, a protective instinct flaring hot in her blood. Jasper noticed the gesture and frowned, but said nothing. He left the room, already shouting orders to the household staff about preparing the nursery. 3 months later, Clara's time came. Her labor lasted through the night and into the following day. Annabel sat with her the entire time, cradling Samuel in one arm while holding Clara's hand with the other. Hester moved between them with the same steady competence she'd shown before. When Clara's daughter finally arrived, smaller than Samuel but equally vocal, Clara wept with exhaustion and relief. "Junia," she said, the name coming to her as if it had always been waiting. "Her name is Junia." Hester cleaned the baby and wrapped her carefully before placing her in Clara's arms. The infant had her mother's delicate features, but Elias's dark eyes that seemed to take in the world with unexpected awareness. Jasper's reaction was identical to before. He examined the baby, noted her physical attributes in his mental ledger, and left without acknowledging the miracle of new life. Elias was permitted to see his children only under strict supervision. Twice a week, he was brought to the nursery with an overseer standing guard at the door. He would hold Samuel and Junia for brief, precious moments, studying their faces as if trying to memorize every detail. Samuel was serious and watchful, rarely crying. Junia was fiercer, her small fists always reaching for something to grasp. "They're beautiful," he told Annabel during one visit, his voice thick with emotion. "They have your strength," she replied quietly. But these supervised visits weren't enough. Annabel and Clara began sneaking Elias into the house during the infants' afternoon naps when Jasper rode out to inspect the fields. They would gather in the nursery, forming a quiet family unit that defied every rule Jasper had set. Elias would hold his children, and Annabel and Clara would lean against him, and for those stolen hours, they could pretend the world was different. It was during one of these secret meetings that Jasper's intentions became clear. He stormed into the parlor where Annabel sat reading, his face twisted with rage. He'd found one of Elias's bandanas in the nursery, evidence of the unauthorized visits. "You've developed feelings for that slave," Jasper spat. "Both of you. I see it in how you look at him." Annabel stood, lifting her chin defiantly. "He's the father of my child. Of course I care what happens to him." "He's property," Jasper snarled. "Nothing more. And these babies," he gestured violently toward the stairs. "I'll sell them once they're weaned. They'll fetch good prices, and you'll never see them again." The words hit Annabel like a physical blow. Sell them. Tear her son away. Send him to some unknown plantation where she could never protect him. Never watch him grow. "No," she whispered. "You have no say in this matter," Jasper replied coldly. "I own those children just like I own everything else on this land." They planned the escape in desperate whispers. Annabel packed food, while Clara gathered swaddles and warm blankets. Elias convinced another enslaved worker to leave a cart near the edge of the quarters, ready for a quick departure. They would go during the next storm, when thunder would cover the sound of their flight, and rain would wash away their tracks. The storm came on a moonless night in October. Rain hammered the roof as Annabel and Clara crept down the back stairs, each carrying a baby wrapped tightly against the weather. They met Elias at the kitchen door, and together they ran through sheets of rain toward the woods behind the quarters. Lightning split the sky. In that brief flash of illumination, they saw Jasper on horseback at the tree line, surrounded by 4 mounted overseers. "Did you think I wouldn't anticipate this?" Jasper's voice carried over the thunder. "Did you think I'm a fool?" Elias stepped in front of Annabel and Clara, shielding them and the children. "Let them go. Your fight is with me." "My fight is with anyone who defies my authority," Jasper replied. He dismounted and walked forward, pulling a whip from his saddle. The overseers forced Elias to his knees in the mud, binding his hands behind his back. Jasper struck him once, twice, 3 times across the back, each blow landing with sickening force. "Watch!" Jasper commanded Annabel and Clara. "Watch what happens to those who defy me." Annabel turned away, but Jasper grabbed her chin and forced her head around. Clara sobbed, clutching Junia tighter. The babies wailed, their cries lost in the storm. 15 lashes. Elias endured them without crying out, his body rigid with pain. When it was over, he collapsed forward into the mud. The overseers dragged him away toward the quarters. Jasper turned to his daughters, rain streaming down his face. "Bring the children inside," he ordered. Back in the house, Annabel and Clara stood shivering in the entrance hall, holding their babies close. Jasper dried himself with a towel, his movements deliberate and calm, despite the violence he'd just inflicted. "I've changed my mind," he said. "I won't sell them after all." Annabel's head snapped up, hope flaring in her chest. Jasper crossed the room and took Samuel from Annabel's arms, then Junia from Clara's. He held both infants, studying their faces with cold calculation. "I'll raise them myself," he continued. "Train them. Mold them into exactly what I need them to be. They'll grow up knowing my authority, obeying my commands without question. The perfect instruments." Lightning flashed through the windows, illuminating his face in stark relief. "They'll never know their father as anything but a field hand," Jasper said softly. "And they'll never know that my blood runs in their veins. They'll be mine in every way that matters." He looked down at the babies in his arms, his expression unreadable. "I'll raise them my way." The next morning, Elias lay on a pallet in the quarters, his back a raw map of violence. Old Ruth, the plantation's healer, worked silently with poultices and clean water, her wrinkled hands gentle as she tended the wounds. Each breath Elias took brought fresh pain, but he made no sound. His jaw remained tight, his eyes fixed on the rough wooden ceiling above. "You need rest," Ruth murmured. "These cuts run deep." Elias nodded once. Through the open doorway, he could see the main house in the distance. Somewhere behind those walls, his children slept in their cribs, unaware of what had been done to protect them. Or perhaps not protect them at all. Perhaps he'd only delayed a different kind of destruction. In the nursery, Samuel and Junia had been placed under the watch of 2 house servants who never left their posts. Jasper had given explicit instructions: no unauthorized visitors, no exceptions. As months slid into years, the plantation settled into a new and unsettling rhythm. Samuel grew serious and watchful, his dark eyes tracking everything with careful attention. He learned to read by age 5, sitting in Jasper's study, while the man drilled him in arithmetic and geography. Jasper taught him discipline through rigid schedules and swift punishment for any deviation. Obedience was rewarded with books. Defiance was met with isolation in the cellar. Junia, meanwhile, grew strong and restless. She climbed trees that most boys wouldn't attempt. She lifted hay bales that made grown men grunt with effort. Jasper watched her physical prowess with satisfaction, seeing in her the strength he'd specifically bred for. He taught her to ride horses, to track animals through the woods, to endure physical hardship without complaint. Both children were raised with clear rules. Jasper Harrow was their father, their master, their entire world. They were to obey him without question. They were superior to the enslaved workers, but not quite equal to white society. They existed in a strange in-between space that Jasper controlled absolutely. But Annabelle and Clara refused to let their children's souls be shaped entirely by their grandfather's cruelty. They came at night when Jasper rode out to visit neighboring plantations or fell into drunken sleep in his study. Annabelle would slip into Samuel's room and read him different stories, tales of cleverness overcoming strength, of kindness rewarded, of people who chose compassion over cruelty. Clara would sit with Junia and teach her to sew, to cook, to care for things gently, despite her powerful hands. "Remember," Annabelle whispered to Samuel during one late visit, "strength without mercy makes monsters." "But Father says mercy is weakness," Samuel replied, his young voice uncertain. "Your father is wrong about many things," Annabelle said carefully. She never said more. The risk was too great. But she planted seeds, small questions that might one day grow into understanding. The children saw Elias frequently, but always in the context of labor. Elias carrying lumber from the mill to the construction sites. Elias repairing fence posts along the property boundaries. Elias sweating in the fields during harvest season, his muscles straining under impossible loads. He worked with steady competence, never complaining, never meeting Jasper's eyes with anything but neutral respect. But Samuel noticed things. He noticed how Elias always positioned himself between the overseers and the younger enslaved workers when tensions rose. He noticed how Elias would pause near the main house garden, his eyes lifting briefly to the windows where Samuel and Junia sometimes played. He noticed the small kindnesses: Elias helping elderly workers with heavy loads, Elias sharing his water ration with children too weak to carry their own. Junia noticed different things. She noticed Elias's careful movements, the economy of motion that spoke of someone who understood his own strength. She noticed how the other enslaved workers looked to him for guidance, even when overseers were present. She noticed that he never wasted energy on anger, channeling everything into controlled purpose. When their chores allowed, which wasn't often, Samuel and Junia met behind the smokehouse. It was their secret place, hidden from Jasper's view by hanging meat and thick smoke. "Why doesn't Elias ever smile?" Junia asked during one meeting. She was 7 years old, already tall for her age. Samuel, 9 and thoughtful, considered the question. "Maybe he has nothing to smile about." "Father says enslaved people are content with their work," Junia said, but her tone suggested doubt. "Father says many things," Samuel replied carefully, echoing words his mother had once whispered to him. They sat in comfortable silence, watching ants carry crumbs across the dirt. Years passed with the slow weight of routine. By the time Samuel turned 8 and Junia 6, they'd learned to navigate Jasper's expectations while harboring private questions they shared only with each other. Jasper believed he was successfully molding them into obedient instruments of his will. He didn't see the secret language they developed, the coded glances, the shared understanding that something about their world felt fundamentally wrong. Annabelle and Clara continued their nighttime visits, whispering fragments of truth that slowly accumulated into dangerous knowledge. "You have his eyes," Clara told Junia one night, brushing the girl's hair. "Whose eyes?" Junia asked. Clara's hand stilled. "Someone kind." "Father isn't kind," Junia said. It wasn't quite a question. "No," Clara agreed softly. "He isn't." These conversations planted questions that grew like underground roots, invisible but persistent. The revelation came on a sweltering August afternoon. Samuel had been sent to fetch Elias for a carpentry task. He found the man working shirtless in the equipment shed, repairing a broken wagon wheel. Sweat gleamed on Elias's shoulders and back, and in the harsh midday light, Samuel saw them clearly for the first time. Scars. Dozens of them, crisscrossing Elias's back in a pattern of old violence. Samuel froze in the doorway, his breath catching. The scars were long and raised, some faded to silver, others still dark. They told a story of repeated brutality, systematic punishment, pain endured and survived. Elias turned, noticing Samuel's stare. For a moment, their eyes met. Samuel's wide with shock, Elias's carefully neutral. Then Elias pulled his shirt back on, covering the evidence. "Master Jasper needs me?" Elias asked quietly. Samuel nodded mutely, unable to find words. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep. He kept seeing those scars, kept imagining what it took to survive such treatment. He remembered something he'd noticed months ago, a faded mark on his mother's arm that she usually kept covered. When he'd asked about it, she'd changed the subject quickly, but not before he saw the same kind of raised scar tissue. The pattern was identical. 3 days later, Samuel found Junia in the barn loft at dusk. The space smelled of hay and horse leather. Dusty beams of fading sunlight slanted through gaps in the walls. "I need to ask you something," Samuel said, climbing up beside her. Junia set down the rope she'd been braiding. "What? Have you ever noticed how Father treats Elias differently than the other workers?" Junia considered this. "He watches him more, speaks to him more, punishes him more." "Why?" Samuel pressed. "I don't know," Junia admitted. "It's like," she struggled for, "it's like Father is afraid of him, but also needs him." Samuel pulled his knees to his chest. The lantern between them flickered, casting dancing shadows on their faces. "Mother has scars," he said quietly. "On her arm. They look like the ones on Elias's back." Junia's eyes widened. She understood immediately what Samuel was suggesting, even if she couldn't voice it. They sat in the growing darkness, both children suddenly aware that the world they'd been taught to believe in might be built on lies they were only beginning to glimpse. "Why does Father treat Elias that way?" Junia finally asked, her voice small and uncertain. Samuel shook his head slowly. "I don't know, but I think there's something he doesn't want us to understand." The lantern light flickered between them, and neither child spoke again. By the time Samuel turned 13 and Junia 12, Life on the plantation had grown harsher and more unpredictable. The heat pressed down like a hand that summer morning, turning the air thick and difficult to breathe. Samuel stood beside Jasper's desk in the study, watching his grandfather. He still called him father, though the word tasted wrong now. Mark figures in a ledger with angry strokes. "Production is down again," Jasper muttered, not looking up. "These lazy animals need stronger motivation." Samuel said nothing. He'd learned that Jasper preferred an audience to a conversation. "You'll oversee the cotton weigh-ins today," Jasper continued, pushing the ledger toward Samuel. "Record every pound. Anyone who comes up short loses their evening meal." Samuel's stomach turned, but he kept his face blank. "Yes, sir. And keep your eye on that tall one. Elias." Jasper's mouth twisted around the name. "He's been slower lately. Age catching up, I suppose. Might need to be made an example of." Samuel's hand tightened on the ledger, but he nodded and left the study before Jasper could see the anger in his eyes. Outside, the plantation sprawled under merciless sun. Samuel walked toward the cotton fields, passing enslaved workers who averted their eyes as he approached. He hated that they feared him, hated that they had to. In the distance, he saw Junia hauling water buckets from the well. Jasper had assigned her to physical labor this summer, claiming it would build character and usefulness. She moved with smooth efficiency, her shoulders already showing the muscle that constant work built. She caught Samuel's eye as he passed, and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding that had been growing for years. They both saw it clearly now. The system, the cruelty, the deliberate breaking of human beings for profit. The days blurred together under the summer heat. Samuel learned plantation management by watching Jasper's methods. He learned how to calculate profit margins, how to determine which workers were worth their upkeep, how to maintain control through fear and punishment. Every lesson made him hate his grandfather more. Junia worked alongside the enslaved community, and they quietly accepted her presence. She never complained about the labor, never acted superior. She simply worked, her hands becoming calloused, her skin darkening from constant sun exposure. The other workers began to trust her in small ways, a shared glance, a whispered thank you, a careful nod of respect. Elias worked nearby often. Neither sibling spoke to him directly. It would draw too much attention, but they watched him. Samuel noticed how Elias still positioned himself to shield younger workers from the overseer's worst anger. Junia noticed how he never wasted movement, conserving strength for when it mattered most. The storm came on a Tuesday evening in late July. Thunder rolled across the sky as rain hammered the plantation. Samuel and Junia had been excused from evening duties due to the weather. They sat in the parlor while Jasper reviewed accounts in his study, the sound of his angry muttering carrying through the walls. Annabelle appeared in the doorway, her dress damp from checking the windows. She looked at her children, really looked at them, and something seemed to break inside her. "Come with me," she whispered. They followed her upstairs to her private room. Clara was already there, wringing her hands nervously. The two women looked at each other, and some silent agreement passed between them. Annabelle sat on the edge of her bed. Rain streaked the windows behind her, and lightning cast her face in sharp relief. "There are things you need to know," she said quietly. "Things we should have told you years ago." Samuel's heart began to pound. Junia moved closer to him instinctively. "Elias," Annabelle continued, her voice trembling, "he's not just another worker to us. To you." "What do you mean?" Samuel asked, though part of him already knew. Clara spoke up, tears in her eyes. "He's someone who would die for you. Someone who has suffered for you. Someone whose blood runs in your veins." The words hung in the air like the storm outside. Annabelle reached out and took Samuel's hand. "Your grandfather forced this, forced all of it. But despite the evil that brought you into this world, you are not evil. You are theirs, ours, and you are loved." Junia's breath came faster. Elias is our father. It wasn't a question. The truth had been circling them for years, visible in the careful way Elias watched them, in the scars they all shared different versions of, in the features Samuel saw reflected in the man's face. Yes, Annabel whispered. Samuel felt something shift inside him, pieces of his identity rearranging into a new and terrible pattern. He wasn't Jasper's son at all. He was the child of a system designed to break people, born from violence and control. But he was also Elias's son, and that meant something different entirely. "Why didn't you tell us?" Junia demanded, her voice fierce. "Because we were afraid," Clara admitted. "Afraid of what your grandfather would do if he knew you knew. Afraid of losing you." "You won't lose us," Samuel said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "But things have to change." Annabel looked at him with something like hope. "What do you mean?" "I mean we can't keep living like this," Samuel said. "Watching people suffer. Being part of it. We're just children," Junia protested, but her eyes were already calculating possibilities. "We're old enough to see," Samuel countered. "Old enough to act." They started small. Samuel began misdirecting shipments, recording deliveries incorrectly, so supplies ended up distributed among the enslaved quarters instead of sold at market. He damaged equipment at night. A broken wheel here, a frayed rope there. Nothing obvious enough to draw suspicion, but enough to slow production and cost Jasper money. Junia slipped food and tools to workers who needed them, hiding her actions among the chaos of daily labor. She learned which overseers could be distracted and when. She learned the rhythms of the plantation well enough to move through its shadows unseen. The enslaved community noticed. They said nothing directly, but Samuel began to feel different eyes on him, not fearful ones, but watchful, waiting ones. Small gestures of support appeared. A worker would stumble near him, whispering a warning about an overseer's mood. Another would leave tools in places Samuel needed them. They were building something, slowly, carefully, in the spaces between Jasper's attention. The messenger came on a moonless night in late August. Samuel was in the quarters, delivering bandages his mother had secretly provided, when someone grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows. He tensed, ready to fight, but a calm voice stopped him. "Easy, young master. I'm a friend." The man was tall and lean, with intelligent eyes, and hands that looked equally comfortable holding a pen or a weapon. He wore the rough clothes of a field worker, but something about his bearing suggested he'd never been enslaved a day in his life. "Who are you?" Samuel whispered. "Name's Ezekiel," the man replied. "I carry messages between the free settlements north of here and folks who need help." Samuel's pulse quickened. "How do you know I need help?" "Word travels," Ezekiel said simply. "People notice when young folks start fighting the system from the inside. Question is, are you serious about it? Or just playing at rebellion?" Samuel met his eyes directly. "I'm serious." Ezekiel studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Good, because there are people beyond this land who will help you. But you need to be smart, patient, and ready to commit to something bigger than just making your grandfather angry." "I'm ready," Samuel said, and meant it. They talked for 20 minutes, Ezekiel explaining the network of resistance, the routes to freedom, the communities waiting to support those brave enough to run. He gave Samuel a way to send messages, a coded system using everyday objects arranged in specific patterns. When Ezekiel finally disappeared back into the night, Samuel stood alone in the darkness, his mind racing with possibilities. He found Junia waiting by the smokehouse, their old meeting place. "Where were you?" she asked. Samuel looked at his sister, his true sister, not the complicated half-truth they'd lived with before, and saw the same fierce determination that burned in his own chest. "There are people beyond this land who will help us," he whispered. Winter passed quietly, the plantation unaware that plans were forming beneath every routine. Early spring arrived with morning dew heavy on the fields, turning the cotton rows silver in the dawn light. Samuel walked between the rows carrying a bundle of herbs, dried lavender, rosemary, and mint that Annabel claimed were for seasoning the house meals. No one questioned him. No one looked twice. But tucked inside the bundle, wrapped in oiled cloth, were 3 carefully coded messages destined for Ezekiel. Samuel had learned the routes by now. He knew which fence posts marked safe drops, which trees had hollows deep enough to hide folded papers, which workers could be trusted to pass things along the invisible chain that connected the plantation to the free settlements beyond. He moved with practiced casualness, never hurrying, never looking nervous. He reached the old oak at the edge of the tobacco field and knelt as if examining the soil. His fingers found the hollow beneath the twisted root. He slipped the messages inside and covered them with loose bark and dirt. When he stood, Elias was working 20 yards away, repairing a section of fence. Their eyes met briefly. Elias gave the smallest nod, acknowledgement, approval, pride, then returned to his work. Samuel walked back toward the house, his heart beating steady and strong. In the quarters, Junia directed a group of women hauling water. "Lift from your legs, not your back," she instructed, demonstrating the motion. "Keeps you strong, keeps you from injury." The women copied her movements. They'd been doing this for weeks now, these lessons disguised as ordinary labor. Junia taught them how to lift heavy loads efficiently, how to move quickly without losing balance, how to use their body weight as leverage. She showed them exercises hidden inside everyday tasks. Squats, disguised as bending to pull weeds. Arm strength built through carrying buckets in specific ways. The men received similar training when they worked the fields. Junia would demonstrate better techniques for swinging tools, for maintaining endurance through long days, for coordinating movements with others. The overseers saw only workers becoming more efficient. They didn't see a small army being quietly prepared. An older woman named Ruth approached Junia during the midday water break. She spoke low, her voice barely audible. "My grandson asks when," she said simply. Junia met her eyes. "Soon. When the master travels next month." Ruth nodded and moved away, but Junia saw the way she stood straighter, the way hope changed the set of her shoulders. Inside the main house, Annabel walked the hallways with deliberate purpose. She carried a basket of linens, the perfect excuse to move through every room. But her real task was mapping, counting steps between doorways, noting which floorboards creaked, memorizing the location of every window latch and back staircase. She sketched the layout in her mind, creating a mental map she would later draw for Samuel. Clara worked the same way, her exceptional memory cataloging details that would matter when the time came. She knew which doors had keys and which could be forced. She knew the guards' rotation schedule, which ones drank too much in the evenings, which ones were jumpy, and which were lazy. She knew where Jasper kept his pistols and where the overseers stored their whips. They met in Annabel's room after dark, speaking in whispers while they recorded everything on scraps of paper. "The back entrance near the kitchen," Clara said. "The lock is old. Samuel could break it with the right leverage." Annabel made a note. "What about the gate to the road?" "2 guards at night, but they change at midnight. There's a 15-minute gap when the new ones are still getting situated." "Perfect," Annabel murmured. She'd slipped her spare house keys to Samuel weeks ago, justifying their absence by claiming they'd been misplaced. Jasper had been annoyed, but not suspicious. Now, Samuel had access to locked rooms, to storage areas, to places where weapons and supplies could be quietly redistributed. The sisters worked together like parts of a single mechanism, each contributing what only she could provide. Their years of captivity had taught them to notice details, to move quietly, to hide their intentions behind compliant faces. Now, those same skills served a different purpose entirely. In the barn loft, Elias sat with Samuel during stolen moments between work assignments. "Your grandfather thinks in patterns," Elias explained, his voice low and measured. "He believes people are predictable, because he's never been truly challenged. That's his weakness." Samuel listened intently, absorbing every word. "He punishes to control," Elias continued, "but he always punishes the same way. Public, physical, designed to create fear. So he'll expect resistance to be equally direct, equally obvious." "But we won't be obvious," Samuel said. "Exactly," Elias confirmed. "We'll be water around stone, present everywhere but impossible to grasp." He taught Samuel how to read Jasper's moods, how to anticipate his decisions based on his patterns of behavior. He showed Samuel how the cruelest men were often the most predictable because their cruelty followed a logic, a structure they believed was strength, but was actually limitation. "When he travels," Elias said, "he'll leave overseers in charge. They're lazy and arrogant. They'll assume business as usual." "They'll be wrong," Samuel replied. Elias smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "They will. And by the time they realize it, it will be far too late." Samuel felt something unfamiliar blooming in his chest. Pride. Not in Jasper's system or Jasper's name, but in this, in the careful planning, in the alliance with his father, in becoming someone who could think strategically and act decisively. For the first time in his life, he felt powerful. The late-night meetings became regular occurrences. Samuel and Junia would slip into the barn loft after the house went dark, joined sometimes by Elias when he could manage it without drawing attention. They coordinated their separate efforts, sharing information and adjusting plans. "Ezekiel says the northern route is clear through May," Samuel reported. "We'll have safe houses every 20 miles. "How many are ready to run?" Junia asked. 37 confirmed, Samuel said. "More if we count children and elderly who will need assistance." Junia nodded. "I can organize carriers, strong ones who can help those who can't travel fast." They discussed timing, routes, contingencies. They planned for complications and prepared backup strategies. They moved with the careful precision of people who understood the cost of failure. Throughout the quarters, whispers spread like roots beneath soil, quiet, persistent, connecting everything. Workers who'd never spoken of freedom before began to imagine it. They looked at Samuel and Junia and saw something new. Leadership born not from authority, but from genuine commitment. Elias watched his children coordinate the impossible and felt an emotion so intense it frightened him. Pride, yes, but more than that, hope. Real, tangible hope that this monstrous system could actually be broken. On a clear night in late March, Samuel and Junia stood in the barn loft looking out over the dark plantation. Stars filled the sky above them, more stars than seemed possible, their light ancient and steady. Somewhere in the quarters, people slept with dreams of freedom. Somewhere in the house, their mothers planned and schemed. Somewhere in the fields, their father rested his scarred body and believed in tomorrow. Junia reached out and took Samuel's hand. His fingers closed around hers, warm and certain. "When he leaves the plantation," Samuel said quietly. "We rise," Junia finished. They stood together in the starlight, two children born from violence who had chosen to become something else entirely. The spring air smelled of possibility and growing things. Below them, the plantation slept, unaware that its days were numbered. 2 weeks crawled by like wounded animals. Jasper announced his departure to attend an auction in the neighboring county. He would be gone 3 days, maybe 4. The timing was perfect, exactly what Samuel and Junia had been waiting for. The morning of his departure arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures. Jasper stood in the drive while workers loaded his carriage with luggage, supplies, and the ledgers he needed for business. He barked orders at the overseers, reminding them of their duties in his absence. Samuel stood nearby, holding a stack of accounting books. His role was to assist with last-minute preparations, to ensure nothing was forgotten. He'd played this part before. The dutiful grandson, the obedient assistant. His face showed nothing but respectful attention. Inside his coat pocket, folded small and tight, was a message meant for Ezekiel. It contained the final signal, confirmation that the uprising would begin tonight, after Jasper's carriage disappeared down the road. Samuel planned to drop it at the oak tree hollow on his way back from the drive. Jasper turned to take the ledgers from Samuel's arms. His hand brushed against Samuel's coat. He stopped. His fingers had touched something that didn't belong, a slight bulge in the fabric, an irregularity in the smooth line of the coat. Jasper's eyes narrowed. His hand moved deliberately to the pocket. "What's this?" he asked. Samuel's heart dropped into his stomach. "Sir?" Jasper's fingers found the folded paper. He pulled it out slowly, his expression shifting from curiosity to suspicion. He unfolded the message and read it. The words were coded, but not coded enough. References to the oak, to tonight, to 37 ready. Jasper had spent his entire life controlling people through fear and surveillance. He knew conspiracy when he saw it. His face transformed. Rage overtook every other feature. "Inside," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now!" Samuel's mind raced through possibilities. Run, fight, deny. But overseers had already moved closer, their hands on their weapons. There was nowhere to go. Jasper grabbed Samuel by the collar and dragged him toward the house. Workers stopped loading the carriage, frozen in place, watching with wide eyes as the master hauled his grandson across the drive. Inside Jasper's office, the door slammed shut. Jasper threw Samuel against the desk. The ledgers scattered across the floor. Jasper held up the message, his hand shaking with fury. "You scheming little bastard," he hissed. "You've been planning this whole time. You've been planning this." Samuel said nothing. His silence was admission enough. Jasper struck him across the face, a blow so hard Samuel's vision sparked white. He stumbled sideways, but Jasper caught him by the shirt and struck him again. Then again. Blood filled Samuel's mouth, copper and warm. "Who else?" Jasper demanded. "Who else is part of this?" Samuel spat blood onto the floor. "No one." Jasper hit him harder. "Liar! Who taught you? Who helped you?" Samuel's knees buckled, but he refused to answer. Jasper could beat him until bone showed through skin. He would never give up Junia, never betray Elias or his mothers. Jasper threw him to the ground and kicked him in the ribs. The air left Samuel's lungs in a painful rush. He curled instinctively, protecting his head and stomach. "Lock him in the cellar," Jasper ordered the overseers who'd followed them inside. "Chain him to the post. Make sure he can't move." They dragged Samuel out of the office, down the hallway, through the kitchen, and down the narrow stairs to the cellar. The space was dark and damp, smelling of earth and mildew. They chained his wrists to an iron post embedded in the stone floor, then left him there in the darkness. Junia was working in the quarters when she heard the commotion. She ran toward the main house, arriving just in time to see overseers dragging Samuel toward the cellar entrance. His face was bloodied, his movements weak. "Samuel!" she shouted, sprinting forward. Hands grabbed her from behind. Two overseers caught her arms and wrestled her backward. She fought with everything she had, kicking, twisting, throwing her weight against them. But there were too many, and they were too strong. "Get her to the storage shed," one of them grunted. "Master's orders." They hauled her away while she screamed her brother's name. She saw Annabel appear in the doorway of the main house, her face pale with horror, before more overseers moved to intercept her mother as well. The entire plantation erupted into chaos. Guards rushed through the quarters, searching cabins and pulling people from their work. They found Elias repairing fence posts in the west field, and descended on him with clubs and chains. Within an hour, Jasper had imprisoned everyone who mattered. Samuel remained chained in the cellar beneath the house. Junia was locked in a windowless storage shed near the tobacco barn, her wrists bound with rope. Elias was thrown into a small equipment building and chained to a support beam. Annabel was confined to her bedroom, with the door barred from outside. Clara was similarly locked in her own room, a guard posted in the hallway. None of them could see each other, speak to each other, or coordinate any kind of response. Jasper canceled his trip. He sent riders to neighboring plantations requesting additional armed men. He gathered weapons from his study: pistols, rifles, whips, anything that could be used to restore order through fear. By afternoon, he'd assembled every enslaved person on the plantation in the front yard. He stood on the veranda above them, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "At dawn," he announced, "Samuel and Junia will be executed. You will all witness it. You will all understand what happens to those who forget their place." His words fell like stones into water, creating ripples of terror. People who had whispered about freedom hours earlier now stood silent, their hope collapsing. Without Samuel and Junia, without Elias, without any way to organize or communicate, the rebellion dissolved like sugar in rain. The workers were sent back to the quarters under heavy guard. The overseers patrolled with weapons visible, watching for any sign of continued resistance. Midnight came. Junia lay on the dirt floor of the storage shed, her wrists raw from the rope bindings. She could hear footsteps above her, Jasper pacing in the main house, back and forth, back and forth. She pressed her face against a gap between the floorboards, a crack so small she could barely see through it, but large enough to carry sound. "We're not done," she whispered into the darkness. "Samuel, are you there?" The cellar was too far away. She knew he couldn't hear her, but she said it anyway, needing to believe the words could somehow reach him. In the cellar, Samuel heard only silence and dripping water. His ribs ached where Jasper had kicked him. His face throbbed. The chains around his wrists were heavy and cold. But then, faint as breath, he heard something. Maybe imagination, maybe hope, maybe something carried on air currents he didn't understand. His sister's voice. "I am," he whispered back into the dark. Early morning darkness, hours before dawn. Jasper sleeps in his chair with a rifle across his lap. The storage shed was silent except for the soft scrape of wood against earth. Junia pressed her shoulder against the rotted floorboard, pushing upward with every ounce of strength she possessed. The board resisted, then gave slightly, creaking in protest. She froze, listening for movement outside. Nothing. She pushed again, harder this time. The board lifted enough for her to wedge her fingers underneath. She pried it loose, revealing a dark crawl space beneath, narrow, musty, filled with decades of accumulated dirt and spiderwebs. Clara had shown her this space years ago during a childhood game of hide-and-seek. "The storage shed used to be a smokehouse," Clara had whispered, giggling as they crawled through the cramped tunnel. "Grandfather built a second floor over the old pit. No one remembers it's there." Junia remembered. She squeezed through the opening, her bound wrists making the movement awkward and painful. The crawl space was barely wide enough for her body. She pulled herself forward on her elbows, dirt filling her mouth and nose, darkness pressing against her eyes. The tunnel ran beneath the shed's foundation and emerged near the tobacco barn's eastern wall. Junia crawled until she felt cool air against her face, then pushed through a gap half hidden by overgrown weeds. She emerged into the pre-dawn darkness, gulping fresh air. Her wrists were still bound. She worked at the rope with her teeth, pulling and gnawing until the fibers began to fray. Minutes passed. Too many minutes, but eventually the rope loosened enough for her to slip one hand free. A guard stood 30 feet away, leaning against the barn wall, his rifle propped beside him. His head drooped forward, sleeping, or nearly sleeping. Junia moved silently through the weeds, keeping low. She reached the barn wall and grabbed a piece of broken timber lying in the grass. She circled behind the guard, her footsteps soundless despite her size. She struck him once at the base of his skull, hard enough to drop him, but not hard enough to kill. He collapsed without a sound. Junia caught him before he hit the ground and lowered him into the grass. She took his keys and his knife. The cellar was locked from outside, the door reinforced with iron brackets. Junia worked the keys one by one until she found the right one. The lock clicked. She pulled the door open slowly, wincing at the scrape of metal hinges. She descended the stone steps into darkness. "Samuel," she whispered. A faint rattle of chains answered her. She moved toward the sound, her hands extended until she found him. Her brother, chained to the iron post, his face swollen and bruised. "Junia?" His voice was raw. "I'm here." She used the guard's keys to unlock the chains. They fell away with a heavy clatter. Samuel tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Junia caught him, supporting his weight. "Can you walk?" "I can fight," he said, though his breathing was labored. She helped him up the stairs, moving slowly, letting him find his balance. They emerged into the cool morning air. The sky showed the faintest suggestion of approaching dawn, a thin line of gray along the eastern horizon. "The quarters," Samuel said. "We need to wake them now." They moved through the darkness together, keeping to shadows, avoiding the main pathways. The quarters stood silent, rows of small cabins, their inhabitants forced into uneasy sleep by exhaustion and fear. Junia knocked softly on the first door. Old Mariah answered, her eyes widening when she saw them free. "Wake everyone," Junia whispered, quietly. "Tell them it's time." Mariah nodded and disappeared inside. Within minutes, people began emerging from their cabins. Men, women, older children. They carried tools, makeshift weapons, grim determination written across their faces. Big John appeared, a massive man who worked the forge. He carried a heavy hammer. "We've been ready for years," he said simply. Then Ezekiel stepped from the shadows. He'd arrived the previous night, slipping through the perimeter undetected. Hiding in the woods when Jasper's guards swept the quarters, he carried rope, cloth for binding wounds, and a calm confidence that steadied everyone around him. "The plan still works," Samuel said, his voice gaining strength. "We take the armory first, then the perimeter, then the house." They moved as a coordinated unit, quiet, purposeful, efficient. Years of secret preparation showed in every action. They knew which guards fell asleep at their posts, which doors were poorly locked, which routes offered the most cover. The armory was a small building near the main house. 2 guards stood watch. Ezekiel and Big John approached from different angles, using darkness as cover. They subdued both guards without raising alarm. Cloth over mouths, arms locked around throats until consciousness faded. Inside the armory, they found rifles, ammunition, tools that could be turned into weapons. They distributed everything quickly, taking only what they needed. "No unnecessary killing," Samuel reminded them. "We're not here to become what they are." Next came the perimeter roads. Small groups moved to block the 3 main routes leading to the plantation. They used wagons, fallen logs, anything heavy enough to prevent reinforcements from arriving quickly. They stationed people at each blockade, armed and ready. Then they turned toward the main house. The house guards realized too late that something was wrong. They saw shadows moving in coordinated patterns, heard whispers carried on the wind, noticed the unusual silence. By the time they understood they were under attack, the rebels had already surrounded them. Junia moved through the chaos with focused intensity. She disarmed one guard with a swift kick, took his weapon, handed it to someone behind her. She never stopped moving, never hesitated. Samuel directed people like a general commanding troops. 5 to the east door. Block the kitchen entrance. Make sure no one escapes through the cellar. Annabel heard the commotion from her locked bedroom. She pressed her ear against the door, listening to shouts and running footsteps. Then she heard her son's voice, clear and strong, giving orders. She began to weep with relief. Clara's door burst open moments later. Junia stood there breathless, holding a key ring. "Mother, come with me." They freed Elias last. He emerged from the equipment building, his face showing bruises and cuts from the beating he'd endured. But his eyes were clear. He embraced his children briefly, fiercely. "I'm with you," he said. "Whatever comes next, I'm with you." They rejoined the group surrounding the main house. Windows shattered as rocks and tools flew through them, not to injure but to announce presence, to declare that power had shifted. Inside, Jasper woke to the sound of breaking glass. He jerked upright in his chair, the rifle sliding from his lap and clattering to the floor. For a moment he thought he was dreaming, some nightmare born from stress and fury. Then he heard boots on his veranda, voices outside every window, the distinctive sound of his front door being tested, then forced. He scrambled for the rifle, his hands shaking. He backed toward his office, his mind struggling to understand what was happening. They were supposed to be chained. They were supposed to be executed at dawn. This wasn't possible. Outside, dawn began to break. The sky shifted from black to deep blue to pale gray. Light spread across the lawn, illuminating the scene. Samuel and Junia stood side by side on the grass, surrounded by dozens of people who had spent their entire lives being treated as property. Behind them stood Elias, Annabel, and Clara, the family that Jasper's cruelty had unintentionally forged. They stared at the house where Jasper cowered behind a locked door. The rifle in his hands felt suddenly worthless. All his power, all his authority, all his certainty about the natural order. It meant nothing against the force gathering outside his door. Samuel's voice carried across the morning air, steady and clear. "It's over." The front door splintered inward with a single brutal kick. Wood shrieked against iron hinges. The heavy oak panel, which had stood for 30 years as the symbol of Harrow authority, crashed against the interior wall and bounced back, hanging crooked on broken hardware. Samuel entered first, stepping over the threshold his grandfather had commissioned, his boots crunching on scattered glass. Junia followed close behind, her shoulders barely fitting through the doorframe, her hands still dirty from crawling through the tunnel beneath the storage shed. Behind them came Elias, moving slowly, favoring his left side where Jasper's beating had cracked ribs. Annabel and Clara entered last, their faces pale but determined, their hands clasped together. The hallway looked like a storm had torn through it. Broken glass from the shattered windows covered the floor. The grandfather clock lay on its side, its face cracked, its pendulum still. A portrait of Jasper's father hung at an angle, the frame split diagonally, the painted face now bisected by a jagged line. Dust drifted in the morning light, streaming through the empty window frames. Samuel moved forward, without hesitation. He had spent years in this house, learning to read ledgers, memorizing supply routes, standing silently while Jasper discussed crop rotations and discipline. He knew every room, every corner, every hiding place. He found Jasper in the parlor. The plantation owner stood behind his reading chair, a pistol clutched in both hands. The weapon trembled violently, the barrel wavering in unpredictable arcs. Jasper's face had gone the color of old parchment. Sweat darkened his collar and ran in visible streams down his temples. "Stay back," Jasper said. His voice cracked halfway through. "I'll shoot. I swear I'll shoot." Samuel stopped 10 feet away. Junia positioned herself to his left, cutting off the route to the side door. Elias stood in the doorway, his presence filling the frame, blocking any escape toward the hall. Annabel and Clara remained in the hallway, visible through the open parlor door, but not entering. Their testimony would come from silence, from witness, from the simple act of standing with their children instead of their father. "You raised us," Samuel said. His voice carried no emotion. He stated facts. "You fed us. You taught us to read. You told us we were special, that we had a purpose." Jasper's eyes darted between Samuel and Junia, searching for something. Recognition, perhaps, or mercy, or the obedience he had spent years trying to instill. "I gave you everything," Jasper said. The pistol continued its trembling arc. "You would have been nothing, just field hands, breaking their backs in the sun. I elevated you. I made you into something better. You made us into prisoners," Junia said. Her voice was flat, hard as river stone. "You dressed it up with lessons and special treatment, but we were always your property. You never let us forget that." Jasper flinched. "I protected you, both of you. Do you think the world would have been kinder? Do you think—" "You beat our father in front of us when we were infants," Samuel interrupted. "You forced him into a role he never chose. You trapped our mothers in your house and treated them like breeding stock." The parlor fell silent, except for Jasper's ragged breathing. "I did what was necessary," Jasper said. "For the legacy, for the family line. You don't understand the pressures, the debts, the—" "We understand everything," Samuel said. "We've seen the scars on Elias's back. We've watched you strike our mothers when they spoke too freely. We've counted every punishment, every humiliation, every moment you reminded us that our lives belong to you." Jasper's hands shook harder. The pistol dipped, rose, dipped again. Elias stepped forward then, moving slowly, deliberately. He crossed the parlor until he stood within arm's reach of Jasper. The pistol swung toward him, the barrel pressing against his chest. "Shoot me," Elias said quietly, "if you want. But you don't deserve that power over me anymore. You don't deserve to make me afraid." Jasper stared at him. The pistol trembled against Elias's sternum. "I could have killed you 100 times," Elias continued. "In the fields, at night, when you weren't watching, but I refuse to become what you are. I refuse to let your cruelty shape me into something unrecognizable." The pistol slowly lowered. Samuel reached out and took the weapon from Jasper's unresisting hands. He checked the chamber, removed the ammunition, and set both pieces on the reading table behind him. Outside, the sound of voices grew louder. The enslaved workers were moving through the house systematically, opening doors, removing weapons from cabinets, gathering ledgers and documents that proved ownership, that recorded sales, that turned human beings into entries in a count book. Big John entered the parlor carrying an armful of rifles. "Armories secured," he said. "Every weapon accounted for." Ezekiel appeared behind him with a stack of ledgers, financial records, property deeds, bills of sale. He set them on the floor near Samuel's feet. Everything that gave him legal authority. Jasper watched his power being dismantled piece by piece. His shoulders sagged. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. "You can't," he whispered. "This is my house, my land, my—" "It was never yours," Junia said. "You inherited it from men who stole it. You maintained it with people you enslaved. Nothing here belongs to you." Old Mariah entered, leading 2 younger women who had worked in the kitchen. They carried keys, dozens of keys strung on iron rings, keys to storage buildings, to locked cabinets, to chains and restraints. They dropped them on the floor with a sound like breaking bells. Jasper stumbled backward, his legs unsteady. He reached for the mantelpiece to steady himself, but his hand slipped. His heel caught on the edge of the ornamental rug. He fell backward through the parlor doorway. His body struck the bottom 3 steps of the grand staircase. There was a sound like green wood snapping. His head connected with the carved newel post at an unnatural angle. Then, silence. Samuel moved to check him, kneeling beside the body sprawled at the foot of the stairs. He pressed fingers against Jasper's neck, searching for pulse, finding nothing. Clara made a small sound. Not quite grief, not quite relief. Something between the two. Annabel closed her eyes and exhaled slowly. Elias stood in the parlor doorway, looking down at the man who had controlled every aspect of his life for more than a decade. His face showed nothing. No satisfaction, no sorrow, no visible emotion at all. "Get a sheet," Samuel said quietly. Junia found one in the linen closet and brought it to him. Samuel covered Jasper's body carefully, tucking the edges around the awkward angles, hiding the broken neck and the empty stare. The house had grown quiet again. The workers had finished their systematic dismantling and now stood in clusters, waiting, watching, uncertain what came next. Samuel stood and walked to the front door, which still hung crooked on its damaged hinges. Junia followed him. Together they stepped onto the veranda where Jasper had stood so many mornings, surveying his domain, recording his profits, calculating his power. Junia pulled the damaged door closed as far as it would go. She found a length of chain someone had removed from the quarters and wrapped it around the exterior handles. She secured it with a heavy padlock taken from the armory. "This house belongs to no one now," she said. Later that same afternoon, the plantation yard filled with people who had spent their entire lives under Jasper Harrow's control. They moved slowly at first, cautiously, as if invisible chains still held them in place. Then someone laughed, a genuine, unfamiliar sound, and the tension broke like fever. Children ran between the buildings. Women embraced. Men stood in small groups, talking in voices they no longer needed to keep low. Samuel watched from the steps of the largest storage building. Beside him stood Junia, Elias, Annabel, and Clara. The five of them had become something unexpected. A family forged not by Jasper's design, but despite it. "We need to organize this," Samuel said. "People are free, but freedom without resources is just another kind of trap." Junia nodded. "The storehouses first. Food, tools, seeds for planting. Everything needs to be distributed fairly." Elias placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "Call them together. They'll listen to you both now." Samuel walked to the center of the yard where the old bell hung, the same bell that had summoned them to labor every morning before dawn. He rang it 3 times, and the celebration quieted. Faces turned toward him, expectant, hopeful, uncertain. "We're free," Samuel said. His voice carried across the yard without shouting. "Jasper Harrow is dead. His authority is broken. No one here is property anymore." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "But freedom means making choices," Samuel continued. "We have storehouses full of supplies that Jasper hoarded. We have tools, seed, livestock, and land. All of it needs to be shared, not claimed by anyone in particular." Junia stepped forward. "We're opening everything. The grain stores, the tool sheds, the smokehouse. Take what you need for your families. Take what you'll need to travel if you're leaving. Take what you'll need to plant if you're staying." Old Mariah spoke up from the crowd. "What about this land? Who owns it now?" "No one," Samuel said firmly. "We're not replacing one master with another. Anyone who wants to stay and work this soil can do so freely. Anyone who wants to leave has supplies and safe passage." Ezekiel emerged from the group, his satchel still slung across his chest. "I can guide people north. There are settlements, free black communities where people have built new lives. You won't be alone out there." The crowd broke into smaller discussions, families and friends conferring quietly about what came next. Some decided immediately to stay, unwilling to leave land they had worked for generations. Others chose departure, eager to put distance between themselves and the place that had held them captive. Samuel and Junia organized the distribution methodically. They opened the main storehouse first, revealing sacks of cornmeal, barrels of salted pork, crates of preserved vegetables. Big John and several other strong men helped carry supplies to families gathered in the yard. The tool shed came next. Hammers, saws, axes, hoes, instruments that had been carefully controlled, rationed out each morning and collected each night. Now they passed freely from hand to hand. Junia led a group to the smokehouse, where cured meats hung from iron hooks. "Take enough for a month," she instructed. "Whether you're traveling or staying, you'll need food security." While supplies moved through the yard, Clara and Annabel approached the structure everyone had avoided mentioning, the punishment post at the yard's edge. It stood 10 feet tall, stained dark at its base, fitted with iron rings at various heights. "Help me," Clara said quietly to several men standing nearby. They brought axes. The post fell in 6 strokes, hitting the ground with a sound like justice finally arriving. The iron rings were gathered and thrown into a barrel to be melted down for tools. By evening, the redistribution was complete. Families had packed wagons or organized supplies for staying. The storehouses stood open and mostly empty, their contents finally serving the people who had actually produced them. Samuel found his mothers sitting together on the steps of the main house, watching the activity with expressions he had never seen before. Something like peace mixed with exhaustion. "What will you do?" he asked them. Annabel looked at Clara, then back at Samuel. "We're leaving," she said. "We can't stay here. Too many memories. Too much pain embedded in these walls." Clara nodded. "We want to go with you and Junia. With Elias. We want to find somewhere new and build something that doesn't carry our father's shadow." Samuel sat beside them. "Ezekiel knows a settlement about 3 weeks north. He says they have good land, clean water, and people who've built a real community." "Then that's where we'll go," Annabel said. The next morning, wagons assembled in the yard. Some headed east toward relatives in other counties. Some went west toward rumored free territories. The largest group prepared to travel north with Ezekiel's guidance. Samuel and Junia joined that northern convoy, along with Elias, Annabel, and Clara. They carried tools, seed, preserved food, and the few personal items they owned. The wagon wheels creaked as they began moving, leaving deep ruts in the dirt road leading away from Harrow Plantation. As summer turned to fall, the traveling group reached the settlement Ezekiel had described. It sat in a river valley surrounded by dense forest, protected and hidden from easy discovery. Houses built from local timber dotted the cleared land. Gardens showed signs of successful harvest. Children played near a communal well. The newcomers were welcomed carefully at first, then warmly as their story spread. The settlement council offered land and assistance in building shelters before winter arrived. Elias found unexpected purpose as someone others came to for advice on moral questions, on resolving disputes, on thinking through difficult decisions. His years of maintaining dignity under impossible conditions had given him wisdom people recognized and respected. Annabel and Clara established a communal kitchen, coordinating food preparation for seasonal festivals and emergency situations. They taught younger women recipes and preservation techniques, building networks of care and mutual support. Samuel used his strategic mind to organize trade routes with other free settlements, establishing systems for sharing resources and information. Junia trained volunteers in self-defense and coordinated watch schedules, ensuring the community could protect itself from threats. The family healed slowly. Trust rebuilt gradually. Laughter returned in small moments that accumulated into genuine joy. Behind them in Mississippi, the Harrow Plantation stood abandoned. The main house's windows remained shattered. Vines crept up the columns of the veranda. The fields went unplanted, overtaken by wild growth that erased the precise rows Jasper had demanded. The punishment post lay rotting where it had fallen, slowly being absorbed back into the earth. On a crisp autumn evening, months after their arrival, Samuel and Junia stood at the edge of the forest, looking south toward the land they had left behind. "He tried to shape us into tools," Junia said. Samuel replied, "We became something he never imagined." They turned away, walking toward their new home as the sun set, free, united, and unbroken. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have hand-picked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.